This is Adam Gorney with the Respect My Decision podcast on Rivals. Today's guest is author John Talty and sports editor at AL.com. Wrote this book, The Leadership Secrets of Nick Saban, How Alabama's Coach Became the Greatest Ever. And John, great read, obviously very interesting for not only Alabama fans, but also people in business. And I think just generally people that are interested in recruiting and the college football landscape. How did this book come together, and how hard did you try to get Nick to be a part of it?
Yeah, and so it's been an idea that I've had for a while because, covering Alabama for years now, you just know there's something different about what they're doing. You can see the success, but just having covered college football teams, I remember covering Ole Miss, Mississippi State, and seeing how they did things, and seeing Alabama, I just knew it was different and that there was something really special happening there. And so many people that I've talked to over the years, whether it's former coaches, former players, they always refer to it as almost like Nick Saban runs it like a business, right? He refers to it as the organization. And so I wondered, were there actually things that he does that translate beyond just football? And so I wanted to kind of blend those two worlds in which, if you're a hardcore football fan, there's going to be a lot in there you've never read before that you're going to love. But also, if you're just genuinely curious, like, hey, this guy's obviously had a lot of success, like, how does he do it? There's going to be stuff in there for you as well. To answer the other part, I made my pitch. I respected that, he didn't really want to get involved, which it didn't surprise me. He hasn't gotten involved, I think, in any book really that's come out about him. And so I understood that. And in some ways it was almost a relief that he didn't want to, because it kind of just let me, all right, I can do whatever I want now. I don't have to worry about, him putting his input on certain things. I could just do it exactly the way that I thought was necessary. And I thought that it turned out for the better in that regard.
In the introduction, you write, Nick Saban can be abrasive, he can be charming, he can be gruff, and he can be funny, he can be rude, and he can be generous. He's a real human being, a man with strengths and weaknesses like the rest of us. I think that is like one of the overlying features of this book, that, he does have this organization, but he's just not this guy that just yells at everybody and everyone is afraid of him. How surprised were you as you were talking to people that were really close to him, involved in the process and the organization, that, and you talk about the Alty 10 penny stuff and how he kind of maybe changed there. How surprised were you that he does have this process in place, this idea that you have to go through it to find the success. And he's not just this guy that you see on Saturdays screaming and yelling at players coming off the sidelines.
Yeah. And I think that, I heard some of those stories over the years, but I do feel like just still the way he's portrayed for the most part, it's very black and white. It's, Nick Saban throwing headsets. It's Nick Saban rants. It's all these things where people, I think, believe that he, like you said, is just yelling and screaming all day, every day. And yeah, he absolutely does yell at people. He does use some bad words. He is a football coach. But I thought that it was important to show that he is more than just that and try to create as complete of a picture as possible. And one of the guys who I love talking to, Chris Dishman, who played for him, with the Houston Oilers, was later a Baylor assistant and some of these other places. And he talked about how, Nick Saban, everything he did was to try to make you better. And that he knew that sometimes that led to hard conversations. Sometimes it wasn't fun. But in the long run, you would respect him for doing it that way and not, giving you hugs and kisses every day just because it makes you feel good in that moment. And so many former players I talk to have so much respect for Saban and so much admiration for him that he did push them to be the best. And he truly did want the best for them. And that led to, some tough moments along the way. But it was really out of love. It's just that he's not this, lovey-dovey kind of guy. He's not very warm and fuzzy, but he has his moments, that people have told me about that kind of happen behind the scenes.
An interesting part of the book is about recruiting. And obviously that's going to be a big focus of my interest in the book is he says when he got hired at Alabama, he said, everything we do is about recruiting, everything we do. And he showed that by talking to the secretaries about how they answer their phones, meeting with the janitors to make sure that the building was clean when recruits came in. Like after he had hip surgery, they put grab bars in his bathroom and he got those removed because he didn't want to look like he was aging. Just that level of seriousness when it comes to recruiting. it has to make him on a special level of coach, and why he's been so successful in really everything he does, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think as you know as well as anybody, like if you don't have the right players, it doesn't really matter how good of a coach you are. You can coach them up, but there's a ceiling there if you don't have the right players. And he realized that early on. And so I thought it was so brilliant that in that first meeting he ever has at Alabama, like you said, he has everyone in the building to establish right away, this is our number one priority. This is what everything has to be geared toward, because if we don't have the right people, we're not going to accomplish what we want to accomplish. And I think beyond just that, the fact that he is still so hands-on. I mean, you know better than anybody, like some guys, they have some success, they get a little more hands-off. You know, a lot of guys, like, you know, recruiting isn't their favorite thing to do. You know, we've seen some coaches, I know I've covered coaches where like they don't love the grind of recruiting. It's not always fun tracking down 15 and 16-year-olds and, you know, selling your soul to get them to come to your school. And Saban, I think, you know, he just understands this is what it takes. And so if this is what it takes, I need to do it every single day. And everyone in my operation needs to be working on this every single day. And when you put in that work every day, it obviously gives you a great chance of success. And there's also, you know, many people that I talked to for this book, like, he's also very good at understanding who fits his system. He knows from a personality standpoint, he knows from an athletic standpoint, you know, he's very particular about what he wants. And obviously what he wants is, you know, the best of the best.
Yeah, there is a Twitter coach criticism of you can't measure heart and you can't know how that goes and all of those things. And Nick Saban, and that's something that we've really focused on is like, yeah, and Nick Saban says it in the book, in 10 minutes, you could figure out who's going to be very good. Now, do they have the personality that we are looking for? What are the off-field issues that they might have that were coming up? All of those things that he like really dives deeply on to figure out, like you said, John, if they're a good addition to the program, if there's somebody. And it's interesting that he signs off on all offers, like that he's still involved to that. Like maybe he doesn't even really love recruiting, but he knows he needs it. And so he's going to love it because it's going to be part of it. And that the line that he told the former AD after he hired him, that he's a horseshit football coach, but no one's going to out recruit him, is really the genesis of the truth of all coaching, right? Like you need the players, and then your system is obviously important, but you need the players. And one of the things that you broke down in terms of his recruiting approach, which I found interesting, is, like you said, have the parameters that you want. You need to know that certain types of players, like cornerbacks under 6 feet, the arm length, this, you know, he looked at guys, offensive linemen, how they walk down hallways and what kind of ankle flexibility they had, like that level of seriousness. Information, the more information, the better. And then don't be afraid to adjust your opinion, which, you know, has been called flip-flopping or whatever else in the past, but it's certainly important to be able to not be so stuck in your opinions that you can't see the reality that's in front of you. And so I think those were really interesting things, that he takes it to that level of seriousness. He's not just someone who's like, all right, what we do here works and we're just going to keep doing it. It's constantly refining it to make it the best it could be.
Yeah, and I remember talking to guys who work for him, you know, either as assistant coaches or in his recruiting department about that. And they said sometimes you know, there can almost be a little frustration, just like, why are we like breaking down this guy's tape again? Like he's been committed to us for a year, but he's like, we got to still know, like maybe he was our guy a year ago, but like let's look at the new film. Like maybe we didn't see something the first time. And so it's, you know, you see guys get stuck taking guys that didn't evolve the way that they wanted to. I've seen it. I mean, you know, I'm sure you've seen it a lot as well. Like a guy who's, you know, maybe a high 4-star as a junior, and he doesn't grow anymore and he gets soft. And by the time he gets to campus, you almost know it's not going to work out, but they're like, well, we got to take him, or, you know, well, we liked him initially, so it's like him now. And Saban's just constantly looking at, is there something we didn't see? Is there something we're seeing now? And I think that's why he's so good at it. I mean, has he had misses? Absolutely. Every single person has. NFL teams bomb their draft picks all the time. They dedicate more resources than anybody. But he has a better hit rate than I would say probably anybody, because of all the work that does go into it. And it is, like you said, one of the hardest things to know, which what he dedicates a lot of resources to, is the internal. It's the motivation. It's coaches love to talk about, does this guy love football? You know, that's a question they all want to try to answer. And that's tough. It's tough to answer. And sometimes I feel like when the guys don't pan out, they just didn't have the right kind of internal motivation to be successful in such a competitive environment as Alabama.
I thought it was really interesting that when he was recruiting Julio Jones, 5-star receiver, everybody knew he was one of the best players in the country, that he said, "I would love to win with you, but I will win without you." Like, so many of these coaches go into the living rooms and just beg guys. Like, they're almost in a fit of desperation. And for a lot of these guys, and I talked to all of them, that's almost like a turnoff. Like, you almost want that alpha male to come in and be like, "Look, I'm going to win national championships. I want you to be a part of it, but I'll do it without you." And I think that was one of the reasons why Julio Jones, among many, went to Alabama. But just that level of approach is really interesting. I do want to, John, turn to kind of his coaching tree and just how interesting it is, and how he's sort of revitalized coaches that were going down the tank. I mean, what he did with Lane Kiffin was incredible, and how he approached him and how he got him and recognized it, because two different personalities could not exist in coaching. And when he said about, he was struggling with the spread offenses and the high pace, and, he complained about it, and maybe he complained about it so he could try to figure it out. And he realized he needed to, or he would be left like the dinosaurs. And he said, "We're a Mercedes that's getting ready to drive off a cliff. It looks good, it looks pretty, but it's not working anymore." What is that's in him that realizes, like, look, what I've been doing has worked, but now I need to change. And now I need to bring someone in like Lane Kiffin to change it for me.
I think at its core, it's a humbleness to be willing to change. Because if you think about, especially when that's happening, he had already won 4 national championships as a coach, right? And think about how many guys would just ride that until it ends, right? Ride that. I'm a defensive minded coach. This is what I do. I've won 4 national championships this way. This is what I'm going to do until the end of time. But instead, he makes this shift. And I think what's so interesting about it too is the timing of it. It happens after, they could have won 3 national championships in a row when he starts to make this shift. So it's not like he had a 5-7 season. He's like, "Oh man, I got to blow it up." I mean, he's a kick 6 away from being in the national championship game. And so that to me is so amazing as well, was that, I don't even think it was coming close to coming off the cliff, even though I love that quote. Like, the Mercedes was still driving really well. A lot of people would have loved to have that Mercedes, but he sensed, all right, things are changing. And I think one of the things he's really good at, one of the chapters is evaluate, constantly evolve when necessary. And I think that's what he does really well, because especially around that time frame, everybody took it as him whining, right? He has these complaints like, "Is this what we want football to be?" And it's like, Saban just can't stop it. That's why he doesn't want to do this, blah, blah, blah. And, maybe there's some truth to it. Obviously, he didn't really like it. But ultimately, he's like, "Okay, this is what you guys want. I will figure out a way to do it better than literally all of you." And as we've seen over the last 5-6 years in their offensive revolution, multiple Heisman winners, all of the top quarterbacks now want to go to Alabama when, first 6 years or so, it's all game manager types. I mean, he's completely evolved because that's what he had to do to be successful. And so I think he never has too big of an ego to not be willing to change if he thinks it could benefit the organization as a whole. And he's done that, I think, throughout his time in Alabama, where he's made these different shifts where it might not have been how he would personally want to do things, but he realized it was necessary, and that's why he did it.
That's where it gets interesting in today's culture, because it is now vastly different. And, NIL, some would argue Alabama has been slow to approach it, especially with what Texas A&M has done. And obviously there have been those interactions between he and Jimbo. Transfer portal, it just feels like, transfer portal has been fine at Alabama if needed. They've gotten guys in there already. And now it honestly just feels like Nick doesn't want to deal with NIL, but he knows he has to in this culture, and he's going to be the best at it.
And that's the thing, and I come back to that all the time. And like people, as I've done this little media tour here, I feel like one of the questions I've got is like, do you think NIL is going to push Nick Saban out? I was like, I think it's going to be the opposite. I think he's going to see the challenge of it and be like, listen, I told you guys this is bad for college football, but like these are the rules that you're going to make me play by. I will figure out a way to do it better than you. And you can look at his entire career as a track record to do that. And so, knowing a bit about Alabama, I think they were purposefully conservative year one. I think they wanted to see how things would play out. There was also some Alabama state laws that prevented them from doing certain things. But I think they wanted to see, all right, what's the first year like? We saw very quickly that the spirit of NIL was, pretty much thrown in the trash immediately, and people were going to do what they were going to do. And so I think Saban, that famous Jimbo moment, it all becomes about him and Jimbo. But I thought the point that he was making to a group of very rich people was essentially, this is how the game is being played. We either need to start playing it that way, or we got to find a different way of doing business. And, and I think you're seeing, without knowing specific details, it seems to me at least that Alabama's NIL game is getting ramped up and will be powerful moving forward.
Yeah. His relationship with Sark, this was an interesting one because Sark had major off the field issues, but in some ways almost seemed more mature as a coach on the field than Lane did in that relationship. And it was definitely interesting to see. One of the parts of the book that's interesting that I read was that before Sark left for Texas, it was almost hinted, let's say, that he might be able to take over at Alabama one day. Now, I don't know if that was to keep him there and to keep him as the offensive coordinator for stability purposes, or if that was go to Texas and do your thing, but Alabama will be looming. What's your sense on that? Because that was definitely a major part of this.
Yeah, and I think that's, I think the way you brought that up is a smart way of doing it, because I think there's only, really there might only be one person who can truly answer that question in terms of, was it a way of just trying to keep him, or was it a true thing? But what I can tell you is that, they thought extremely highly of Sark. They were prepared to give him a good bit more money, which he would have been paid more than a lot of head coaches at other places, to remain as the offensive coordinator. And it was implied to him that, from my understanding directly from Saban, that, I'm not going to be forever. One day I'm going to have to leave. And, if you kind of stay and keep doing what you're doing, like, I think you could be that guy. And I think that was, and so at that same time, Auburn was interested in him, which is an interesting little wrinkle to it. And he was supposed to interview with Auburn. And I think around that time when this conversation happened, he pulled out of that and decided not to interview with Auburn. And so he obviously liked the idea of it. Now, of course, Texas is one of the best jobs in the country. And I think that was just too good of a job. He couldn't say no to that opportunity. But I think if Texas doesn't come around, I think Sark does come back for another year. And then, there would probably be more conversations to, I think the formalized head coach in waiting thing pretty much never works. And so I don't know if they would ever have done something like that. But I think the longer he stayed, the more clear it would have been that like he was going to be the guy.
One of the final things, and which is so interesting to me, is like the roundabout way that Nick Saban got to Alabama and how this all happened. Like, even he got turned down for the Kent State job many years ago by a guy, the guy that got the job was named Dick Crum, which is just funny upon itself.
Incredible.
I'm sorry. Yeah. That's funny. I mean, that's just funny. When he was at LSU, Michigan State didn't really put in the money to keep him. He felt that he would never be Michigan, so he'd always be playing second fiddle there. When he was in the NFL, he kind of maybe wanted to go back to LSU, but they had just hired Les Miles, and so that wasn't going to work out. Alabama was trying to get Spurrier and Rich Rod, of all people, to take that job, and they turned it down. And then he ends up at Alabama, and then the story is written from there. In terms of the NFL job, and I think this is really interesting, was it that professionals aren't going to buy into his system, that he didn't have enough time to put it into place to have it work? Was it that the Dolphins drafted Dante Culpepper instead of Drew Brees, which really could have kept him in the NFL, because we all know Drew Brees is one of the best ever? Why do you think that didn't work? And it's not like he completely tanked in the NFL, but it certainly wasn't something that was really clicking.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about that is I do think we look back at it now, and maybe just to contrast all the success he's had in college football, that like we view it as like this massive failure, right? And then like I remember going back and just like doing the research on it, like he really wasn't that bad. I mean, I think they went 9-7 one year. Like people thought that they were going to be a playoff team, and like, you have these injuries and things like that. But like the year before he got there, they were absolutely awful. And the year after he left, they were absolutely awful. And so his NFL time like is not as bad as I think we remember it as. But I think there's a couple things. The Drew Brees thing is fascinating. it's a great what if. There's part of me that thinks it's a little bit revisionist history. Like he's claimed for many years now that Drew Brees got shut down medically, and that's why they couldn't sign him. I think he believes that is the case. There's part of me that thinks, like, knowing how much control that he would have, that, like, could he really not get him? There's just part of me that's a little skeptical of that. But I think one of the big challenges he ran into, there are two of them really. One, at Alabama, everything is a meritocracy. It doesn't matter if you're a 5-star, 2-star. The guy who works the hardest and understands the playbook the best is going to play. Simple as that. And so he will tell a 5-star, listen, you're not getting it done. I'm not playing you. And it is what it is. In the NFL, if a guy's making $20 million a year, that dude is playing no matter what. The owner has made that investment in him. And so you can't do the carrot versus stick thing with playing time when guys have so much money involved. I think that frustrated him. The other part, which he was grumbling to his friends and other people about, was that, it's basically in college football, if you win, it makes it easier to recruit and get more players to keep winning. Right. If you win in the NFL, you get a worse draft pick, and so you get worse players. And so I think that, like, fundamentally, like, didn't make sense to him. It's just like, if I win at LSU, I'm going to sign 5 future first-round draft picks. If I win at Miami, I'm going to get like the 28th pick, and I'm not going to get a top stud, And so I think it's just like, I'm great at recruiting. Why wouldn't I use those abilities, at the college level? And so I think if he stayed or was in a better environment, I think he could have been very successful at the NFL. But I also think he realized, like, my skills are best suited in the college game. And of course, he comes back and rips off 6 national championships. And so I think he made a pretty good decision.
I want to close with saying Nick Saban is not perfect. And the best, one of the best stories of the book, the one that really made me laugh out loud, was when he showed his LSU team the ring before a game. and players were so frightened by the movie, they couldn't sleep, and then they got torched the next day. But his line in it is great. The pregame speech was, you need to scare the hell out of these people, like that crazy bitch coming out of that screen last night, which is just, I could just envision him saying that and those players not responding to it. I love that story. Just tell that story and how it happened.
Yeah, I mean, that story was one of my favorite. It cracked me up when somebody told me it, because it's what's funny is that because he uses that game as an example all the time. I think he used it last year, in which right after a big win in a game you shouldn't have won, it kind of sets you up to maybe have a letdown game. And so famously, the week before that game, LSU beats Kentucky in the Bluegrass Miracle and should not have won that game. All the guys are going wild. And Saban used that as his example of, like, when you're winning, it's harder to do the right things that need to be done. But the thing he's never said before and had never been written about before my book was that he always does like a team movie. And before the Alabama game that year, he took the team to see The Ring. And, he gets a lot of things right. I don't know. I've thought about this. Like, I don't know if he just didn't think that's what the movie was about, or like he didn't think it would be as scary as it was. I really have no idea. But yeah, they saw The Ring. A lot of guys were scared. One of the guys I talked to said, like, multiple starters didn't sleep that night, had all these nightmares. And if you remember, that was a scary movie when it came out. It's been years since I watched it, but it was scary. But the funniest part to me is that this guy has a routine, right? And so he takes a part of the motivational movie they watched and he works it into his pregame speech. He does it all the time. And so I can just imagine him being like, all right, I got to find a way to work The Ring into my pregame speech. What am I going to do? And it's like, let's focus on the crazy girl crawling out of the TV. Like, let's be like that. And obviously it did not resonate, didn't work. They lost 31-0, got their butts kicked. And they told me, like, after that, like, Saban does not show them horror movies ever again. He's realized we're sticking purely to the Gladiator, Red Tails, Miracle type movies.
Awesome. Again, that is John Talty, the author of The Leadership Secrets of Nick Saban, now at bookstores everywhere. Get the book. It's a great read. John, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks. I really enjoyed it.